Hey, welcome back to the show, MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I have a Q&A episode for you today. So we have two questions that we're going to dive into. The first one is related to deload weeks, rest days. We're going to be chatting about the importance of recovery and the issues with overtraining and why it's something that is actually very common. I believe for me, for sure, I've seen this in a lot of my clients, especially a lot of the females I work with who are just have this type A personality where you just want to go and just do as much as you can. I am definitely that way, and I was that way for a while until I realized that it was actually doing more harm than good. So this is a subject that is very, very familiar with, or that I'm very familiar with, and I'm excited to dive into it today. So that's going to be the first question or topic that we're going to dive into. And then the second one is related to fat loss, and we're going to be chatting about the different kind of ways to see if you are, or ways to understand if you are undereating too much when it comes to fat loss. So signs that you might need to either increase your calories or kind of reevaluate your fat loss phase depending on kind of what's happening. We're also going to chat about what deficit is, or what, I guess, how do I phrase this? What is the best kind of range for a deficit? So what's too much, what's too little, depending on kind of different factors. So those are things we're going to dive into today. And these are based off of two questions that I got from, one is from my MetFlex member, Ashleigh, and the other is from a question I got on Instagram. So before we dive into those two, let's really quickly chat about a very, very exciting project that's coming up. I did chat about this a few times in the past, but the Muscle Science for Women program is going to be launching very soon. It's a program that I'm putting together with Ashleigh Vanhouten. Specifically, it's a 12-week program on the theory and application of strength and muscle building specific for women. So we are really, really stoked to get this out there. The official date of the program is going to be Monday, April 12th. And next week's podcast episode is a recording that Ashleigh and I put together, chatting all about the program, answering some questions that we got. So definitely tune into that. That's going to be episode 103. So if you're interested in the program, that episode is going live next week. Or if you're listening to this when it's already gone live, you can check out episode 103 for more details on that. And we will be sharing more about how to sign up and all that jazz within the next month. So stay tuned. And yeah, I think that's all I got for announcements today. So let's get into the questions. All right, so the first question actually has a few questions within it. So I'm just gonna read out the full paragraph, and then I'll dive into a few of the specifics. So this question came from an Instagram direct message. So this person said, "Thank you so much for an amazing and informative podcast. You're the first person I've listened to who I can relate to as far as fitness, health, and muscle building." That makes me super happy. She said, "I was wondering if you could discuss rest days on your podcast. I'm a female firefighter, and some days I don't have time to work out, and I feel tired from lack of sleep and then won't have the energy to work out following my shift. What is your take on rest days and deload weeks? Additionally, I have low cortisol as a result of years of firefighting on top of trying to maintain a heavy workout routine 5 times a week with some 2-a-days. Sometimes I try to make up for missed workouts at work, so I jam it into my days off, even if I'm tired from minimal sleep and the night before. So I was wondering if someone with low cortisol would benefit from more rest. I'm finding it hard to be okay with multiple rest days a week, and also can tell I'm getting weaker the more I try to spin my wheels and train through fatigue. Where is the line between getting enough NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, in versus over resting versus overtraining? Thanks for all your advice. Okay, so that was definitely a bunch of questions kind of within the paragraph I just read. So I'm going to break this down. So the first question within that was, what is your take on rest days and deload weeks, based off of kind of the situation that this person is in? I'm gonna kind of just give you a little of my overall take on rest days and deload weeks, because I feel like, obviously, I'm not a firefighter. I haven't been, in this particular situation, but I have, like I said, worked with many clients that tend to overdo it when it comes to training, and they don't give themselves enough rest and recovery, or rest. Don't give themselves enough time to rest and recover. Wow, that was a mouthful. And I have definitely been there myself as well. So rest days and deload weeks, I feel, are super, super important. Back before I knew anything about this, I was just going nonstop. This was particularly back when I was doing CrossFit. Back then I viewed exercise as kind of my stress reliever. So I always, I was like, this is the time that I can get my stress out, right? And I think that's how a lot of people view exercise as well. It's like their time to just be in, their own groove, get their stress out, and that's what it is. But in the reality of the situation is really that exercise is actually a stress to us, right? So although it might seem like it's a stress reliever for some people, it is a stress to your body. Especially if you're doing, super high intensity training like CrossFit 6 days a week, only giving yourself 1 day of rest, or even on that rest day, maybe you're doing something else because you feel like you need to do more. Been there, done that. It is a recipe for disaster. And although it might not seem like it's going to catch up to you, during that time that you're doing it, it will eventually catch up to you. Some people it'll catch up to you, within a few months. Some people it will take a few years, but eventually it's going to catch up to you. So for me personally, I was just not paying attention to my rest days. I wasn't paying attention to the intensity of my workouts. I was using my workouts as my stress reliever, not realizing that it was adding more stress to kind of my overall stress bucket, is what I like to call it. So we kind of have, I've talked about this before, but we have, this overall stress load that we can manage, right? And every person's different, because every person has different stressors within their life, right? So this is what we call our overall allostatic load, is just basically all of the different stressors that we have in our life, whether it's, work stress, family stress, you're not sleeping well, you're, not eating well, you're not fueling yourself, you're not recovering, how much you're exercising during the week, that adds to that stress bucket. How intense your exercises are, that adds to the stress bucket. And eventually you can basically, I always use this analogy, but you can basically just cause this bucket to kind of overflow if you are not paying attention to your rest and recovery and your sleep and fueling appropriately, right? So that is why, this is one of the reasons why I'm super passionate about this, is because I went through it, and I take a lot of clients through this. And it's really just realizing that recovery is so important, especially if the goal is to change your physique and also build muscle, right? So that was a particular question that this person had, was specifically how important is rest and recovery when it comes to, building muscle, or even if you are, looking to lose body fat, or do both, right? Change your physique. Rest and recovery is so crucial. And it's funny because when I went from training 6 days a week, doing high intensity training like CrossFit, not paying attention to my recovery, to going to hiring my own coach and training like 3 to 4 days a week, sleeping better, having more recovery days, I saw a huge change in my physique, right? So I went from training 6 days a week to training 3 to 4 days a week, and the opposite of what I thought would happen happened. So my body composition started changing, started getting better. I started feeling amazing. I was just recovering so much better. I was sleeping so much better. And it was just like night and day difference. So again, this is why it's so important to pay attention to resting and recovering. And so what does that look like? So when it comes to, I'm going to talk about deload weeks in a second, just briefly, but when it comes to specifically building muscle or changing your physique, the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that your muscles aren't built during your training. They're broken down during your training. They're built during your rest and recovery. So when you break down muscle tissue, you have to basically repair and rebuild it before you can actually make any new muscle. And we can kind of put this into a math equation. So think about this. So the total amount of muscle that we build is equal to muscle protein synthesis minus muscle protein breakdown. So muscle protein Muscle protein synthesis is basically just the building of new muscle tissue using protein from the foods we eat, using protein within our body, using, the stimulus from our resistance training. That all stimulates muscle protein synthesis. That is kind of the building side of things. Then muscle protein breakdown is the breakdown side. It's opposite. If muscle protein breakdown from training is really high, we end up gaining muscle very slowly, or maybe not even at all, even if we're stimulating a lot of muscle protein synthesis. So this is why it's so important to fuel properly and to recover properly, because if you're going to the gym 6 days a week and you're continuously, stimulating your muscles, right? You're stimulating that muscle protein synthesis. It doesn't matter if you aren't recovering, because if you think about this math equation, the total amount of muscle we build is equal to muscle protein synthesis minus muscle protein breakdown. So if muscle protein breakdown is constantly greater than muscle protein synthesis, then you're never going to build muscle, because you're constantly in this kind of catabolic breakdown state, and you're not giving yourself that recovery to actually build the muscle that you're trying to build. So this is where doing more comes with, diminishing returns, right? So training too much and consistently being under recovered will 100% limit your progress. And that is why having deload weeks structured into your program, following a structured program, is super, super important. Again, I did CrossFit for many years, and I have nothing against CrossFit. I love it. I haven't done it in a while, but I know that there's a smart way and a not so smart way to do CrossFit, and that's kind of how I see it. And just besides CrossFit, anything else that you're doing, whether it's training on your own, whether you're doing Orange Theory, more is not always better, and in many, many cases, more is going to be worse. So you really have to kind of think about what you're doing. And think about for example, just take a second and think about your exercise right now. What have you been doing for the last month or two? And have you seen the results that you feel you should have seen with the amount of work you're putting in? If you haven't seen those results that you feel you should be seeing, then you're probably either doing too much, or you probably just don't have enough structure to your training, where you are implementing, appropriate progression, appropriate overload for your muscles to, build, or for yourself to just recover overall. So I'm going to stop rambling on, because I feel like I've gotten that point across in terms of rest and recovery. So in terms of deload weeks, let's chat a little bit about that. So deload weeks are something that I never took myself for a very long time. Again, I was just, go. Yeah, I'll take a rest day here and there and just keep going. Recipe for disaster, like I said. So deload weeks, what they are, is basically a period of time, usually about a week, where you intentionally reduce your training, right? So again, these are super, super important because these are super important to actually have scheduled into your training, because most of us just can't rely on our body to tell us when it's time to take a break. So this is from a mental and a physical standpoint. So I like to schedule deload weeks for myself and for my clients. Every about 4 to 6 weeks is usually a good a good kind of sweet spot. Depends on the person, but every 4 to 6 weeks is really, I mean, for most of my clients, we deload every 5th week. I found that to be a very nice structure, but it also kind of depends, where you're starting and how much you're training and all of that. But 4 to 6 weeks is a good time frame. And it's important that you take that full week, because to take that full deload week, because with each week of, hard training, you build up more and more fatigue, and training stress is going to accumulate over time, right? So if you don't take time to kind of flush out that fatigue, you're going to have worse results. You're not going to be able to recover. So deloads are super, super necessary in order to just, maximize your progress over the long term. And they're also necessary from a mental health side of things, not just physical, but also mental. If you continue to push yourself month after month after month and you don't take a scheduled break, you're going to burn out mentally, not just physically, but mentally. So deload weeks are super important. And they are something that should be scheduled ahead of time into your training. And that's what I got to say about that. So hopefully that made sense. And then there was the last question within this question was, where is the line between getting enough NEAT in versus over resting versus overtraining? So NEAT stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's basically just everything that you're doing outside of the gym. So it's your movement that doesn't include your formal exercise. So, it's your steps throughout the day, it's folding the laundry, walking the dog, fidgeting at your desk. That's all considered NEAT. And the way that I like to quantify NEAT for most of my clients and for myself is having a step goal, right? That's the easiest way to kind of track your NEAT day to day. It's not perfect, right? But it is a good way to quantify it. So the biggest determinant of finding the line, I guess you could say, is going to be looking at your overall stress levels and your personal ability to manage that stress and to recover appropriately, and also to sleep, right? So sleep is obviously a part of rest and recovery, but it's a very, very important part of it. So how do you know if you're doing too much? In general, I would say there's a few telltale signs, especially when it comes to training specifically. So a few of these would be if you have overlapping soreness from one session to the next that just continues session after session, that is a really good sign that you are overtraining. If you're feeling just overall fatigued day in and day out, and you just don't feel recovered, and you just feel this kind of lingering fatigue, that's another sign. If you're less motivated to train, if you see, a decrease in your performance, those are really good signs that you're probably overdoing it. If you have poor muscle pumps in the gym, so when you're going to the gym, you're lifting heavy and you're just not getting that quote unquote pump that you would normally get, that is a sign of overtraining. If you have crappy sleep, if you just have lots of irritability, those are all signs that you're probably overdoing things. So with this question, again, I'm going to repeat the questions. Where's the line between getting enough NEAT in versus over resting versus overtraining? So when I think about NEAT, I think about, like I said, I think about steps. I think about more low intensity walking, maybe very low intensity cardio. So I would say NEAT isn't necessarily a factor that I would look at with overtraining unless you're doing unless you're trying to get 20,000 plus steps a day and you're hiking mountains and stuff like that to get that, then yeah, that would probably contribute to a little bit of probably overdoing it. But in general, most people, when we refer to NEAT, it's just kind of their general movement throughout the day. And it's more so the lower intensity side of things. But when it comes to over resting versus overtraining, I already chatted through some of the signs of overtraining. With over resting, I feel there's not really, I don't know of any real signs of over resting. It would just be, if you're taking weeks off from the gym, you're sitting on the couch not doing anything, then that's probably quote unquote over resting. But like I said, most of the clients I work with, we don't ever have that issue. So yeah, that would be my take on that. But moral of the story is, again, if you are doing exercise month after month after month, if you're doing high intensity exercise, if you're training for even like 5 days a week, if you're not having adequate rest days, if you're not sleeping well, and you're doing all this work, but you're not seeing the results that you want to see and that you should be seeing, then there's something going on there. Something needs to change. So this is where, obviously, like I said, when I went through my own transformation, I had to hire my own coach to have that outside, set of eyes looking in and basically force me to stop doing so much to actually get the results that I wanted to get. And so if you are struggling with this, then, I highly recommend having someone from the outside look in and say, hey, like, these are the things that you could be doing to actually optimize your results without doing as much. And it really tends to be the case. And that's something that I, like I said, a lot of the clients I work with, we most of the time we have to like scale down a few things and really focus on that recovery. So I hope that gave you some insight into rest and recovery, and hopefully helped a little bit to kind of think through, how much you're doing right now and if it would make sense to scale back. And based off of the person who asked this question, I think, you said you're working out 5 times a week, and some days you feel under recovered, you feel like fatigue's building up, and you kind of are just pushing through it. And then you also mentioned some issues with some cortisol levels. So I definitely think it's time to kind of reassess everything you're doing and basically take a step back and spend some time recovering before moving forward. So hopefully that makes sense. And let's get on to the next question. All right, next question is from MetFlex Tribe member Ashleigh. If you don't know what the MetFlex Tribe is, it's compiled of all of the women who have gone through my Keto for Women program, which is a 12-week fat loss specific program where I focus on teaching you the science and application of fat loss with a focus on taking you through keto, but also showing you how to introduce carbs back into your lifestyle. And back into teaching you how to incorporate carbs and become more metabolically flexible. So using keto, but not staying keto forever, has been something that I've been very passionate about, especially over the past few years of, going through the keto lifestyle myself for many, many years, taking clients through it and realizing that it's a really great tool. But for most people, specifically women, it's just that. It's a tool, and it really shouldn't be used for forever. And that's kind of just what I found working with people one-on-one, working with all of my Keto for Women clients. And so that program is really to teach you how to basically become more metabolically flexible and really show you how to do that through a sustainable approach, and teach you the why behind the what, not just tell you, okay, this is what you need to do, but this is why you need to do it. So anyway, rambling on now, but if you're interested in the Keto for Women program, you can check out the link in the show notes, or just go to my website, metflexlife.com, and click on the programs tab, and you'll see the Keto for Women program is under that programs tab, along with my other nutrition and exercise programs if you're interested. All right, let's get into the question. So Ashleigh said, hey, Rachel, can you give a little insight to undereating? How do you know you're undereating, and what deficit is too much? All right, this is a great question. I think it's something that definitely needs to be discussed, because I feel like there's a little bit of confusion behind how to determine what's an appropriate deficit if you're going into a fat loss phase. So let's address the first question first, which is, can you give a little insight into undereating? How do you know you are undereating? So a few of the common symptoms when it comes to undereating, personally, I look at biofeedback with all of my clients, and I track this myself as well. So if you have particular metrics in terms of biofeedback that are, kind of lingering for long periods of time, that is a sign, or that could be a sign that you are underfueling or undereating. Obviously, when we go into a fat loss phase, the definition of a fat loss phase, or definition of fat loss, is being in a deficit. So you're literally putting your body into a deficit, and there will be some things that start to downregulate. So you will see some downregulation in hormones. You will see potentially some, sleep disruption. You will see some hunger. You will feel some hunger. That is part of being in a deficit. But if those things are happening for long periods of time, and they're becoming more and more intense and unsustainable, then that's probably a sign that the deficit is too aggressive. And that's where we would need to kind of scale back. So this is why with all of my clients, we track all of these different biofeedback metrics to make sure that it's not just about like the calories and the exercise. It's about what else is going on. We have to look at the whole picture, and that's where the biofeedback comes in. So a few common symptoms or signs of maybe undereating for too long of a period of time or too aggressive of a deficit would be having sleep disruption for a long period of time. So, maybe not like one night here and there, but like constantly just having poor sleep week after week, or even just like a week or two in a row. That could be a sign of too big of a deficit. Poor gym performance is another one. Obviously, again, there's going to be some short-term disturbances, I guess you can say, in your biofeedback, especially as you get further along into the diet or into the dieting phase, which is, I'm going to talk about that in a second as well, the importance of actually periodizing your nutrition so that you actually have an end date to your diet. I think that's very, very important. So let me just go through these symptoms because I'm just going to ramble on if I don't list them out first. So sleep disruption for long periods of time, poor gym performance, poor recovery, being super, super food focused. So always thinking about food constantly, crappy energy, crappy mood, crappy motivation. For women specifically, having an irregular cycle or not having a cycle at all for kind of months on end, that's definitely a sign that something's going on there. So those would be some of the common kind of like biofeedback metrics that we look at and that we are kind of monitoring throughout a fat loss phase. So when we're talking about the second question, which is what deficit is too much? So basically kind of goes back to all those signs and symptoms that I just mentioned. So if you are experiencing any of those for long periods of time, it probably means that the deficit is too large or that you are that you have been in a fat loss phase for too long and you might need to take a break or like a diet break or a refeed or just a period of maintenance before, going back into the fat loss phase if you haven't achieved your goals yet. And that can kind of go down, we can kind of go down a bunch of different rabbit holes with that. But in terms of what deficit is too much or how to implement an appropriate deficit, the first thing you have to do is realize, like if you're first starting off and you're looking to go into a fat loss phase, I would make sure that you spend some time finding what your current maintenance is first, right? So how many calories can you consume right now to maintain your current weight and your current physique? Because we have to find that first before we even think about implementing a deficit, because we won't know how to adjust from your current intake if we don't know what your current intake is to maintain your weight, right? Because implementing a 10% deficit or a 20% deficit, okay, how do we implement that percentage off of a number that we don't even know, right? So that's why it's important to spend a few weeks basically just finding what your current maintenance is. And realize too that it's not going to be just like one static number. Like it's not going to just be like, okay, I can maintain on 2,100 calories and that's it. No, usually maintenance is a range. So for example, if we use 2,100 calories, someone who's maintaining their weight on 2,100 calories, their maintenance range could be anywhere from 2,000 to 2,200 calories, or it could be even larger. It could be from like 1,900 to 2,300 calories, depending on that person's metabolic health, their activity level. So many different factors play into that. So just realize that maintenance isn't just like one static number. So it's important to kind of find what your maintenance range is first before implementing a deficit, so you know like exactly what percentage to work off of, right? So when we're talking about implementing a deficit, usually with clients, basically we spend like a week or two finding or usually about around 2 weeks minimum of finding like what their current maintenance is or what their current maintenance range is. And then typically I like to implement between a 10 to 20% deficit. That's usually a good starting place for most people. If you implement too aggressive of a deficit right from the start, then it tends to be harder to have some runway to pull from, right? So if you just go balls to the wall right from the start, usually it's not a good situation down the line, and usually it's just unsustainable for most people. So personally, I like to implement a deficit that is a little bit more on the conservative side. So I would say between like implementing about a 10 to 15% reduction from maintenance first, and then basically assessing how progress is being made, right? So we're looking at, the scale, we're looking at body tape measurements, we're looking at progress pictures, we're looking at all those biofeedback metrics we just talked about, and we're looking at those kind of on a weekly basis and seeing how they're fluctuating, right? And seeing how that's going. And based off of that, then we will adjust from there depending on how progress is going, and all of that. So with all that being said, I would recommend first making sure that you know what your current or around what your current maintenance intake is, and then adjusting from there with like a 10 to 20% deficit is a good place to start. Typically anything above like a 30% deficit is very hard to maintain for most people for more than like a week or two. So if we're looking for, implementing an approach that's going to be sustainable for you and, get you to the result that you want, but also being able to maintain that result afterwards, it makes sense in my eyes to start more conservative. Unless you have like a specific goal and a specific, date that you have to be, for example, you have like a photo shoot or whatever that you are prepping for, and you only have a very small amount of time to do that in, and you want to get super, super aggressive in this short period of time. That's a different situation, but that's not most people's situations. So in general, for most people, I would say more of a conservative deficit from the start is going to be a good approach, and then just making adjustments as you go. And, working with a coach, for example, who can help you to make those adjustments, because that's another thing that when we are going into a fat loss phase, it's very, very hard to be patient. And sometimes if we're not seeing, progress happening in a linear fashion, it's hard to kind of think that things are working, right? If you don't see the scale continuously going down day after day, then you think something's wrong, when in reality, weight loss and fat loss is never linear. I promise you that scale is not going to go down day after day after day. There is going to be daily fluctuations. There's going to even be weekly fluctuations. And that's why the scale is just one metric that we use. And that's why we don't look at those daily fluctuations. We look at the weekly averages. Week after week, we look at body tape measurements. Week after week, we look at progress pictures. We pay attention to how you're feeling. We pay attention to your biofeedback. So those are all the metrics that we're kind of, looking at and paying attention to within a fat loss phase. So hopefully that kind of answered your question in terms of some signs and symptoms to look for in terms of, how if you're under eating, and then also thinking about like that deficit and where you're actually setting it from. So finding your maintenance first and then implementing that deficit, and like just spending 2 or 3 weeks to just find your maintenance. It's so powerful what that can do before just, before even like, for example, I've had some clients come to me and think that their maintenance is way lower than it actually is. And so it can be super powerful to kind of open their eyes to like, wow, like you could be eating so much more and still maintain your weight. And that's something that it's super powerful, because who doesn't want to eat more? Anyway, that just comes down to more specifics and just being kind of, educated on what you're doing. And then another side of this is also the nutritional periodization side of things. So just realizing that, if you do go into a fat loss phase, having an end date to your fat loss phase, I personally think is very important, because you don't want to be dieting forever. Even if you don't reach your goal within the certain amount of time that you think that you should have reached it in, it's important to implement maintenance phases within your periodization schedule. It's important to implement diet breaks, refeeds, things like that. And these are a lot of the factors that a lot of people forget about. They kind of just they're like, all right, I'm just going to diet until I reach my goal. If that diet is like more than 6 months long, that's like the max. Max. I would even say like 4 months is probably the max that I would bring someone through diet, like 12 to 16 weeks. But that's also including like refeed days and diet breaks and things like that. If you are just like going balls to the wall, like, I don't know why I keep saying that saying, if you're just going like hard day in and day out, like you're eventually going to burn out and you're not going to be able to sustain what the results that you've gotten, right? So you have to be super strategic about your fat loss phase. And if you don't have structure, if you don't have strategy, you're just making it so much harder for yourself. So yeah, anyway, now I'm getting off on a tangent, but hopefully that answers your question. And Ashleigh, you know a lot about this because we've dove into this a lot in the Keto Foreman program. It's all about, actually going through all of these phases and really going through this. So, but in terms of under eating, that's kind of how I would look at it is kind of paying attention to those signs, and especially if they're happening for long periods of time and you don't have any resolve with that over time. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that answered your questions. And those are all of the questions we have for today. If you have any questions for the show that you want me to address, definitely check me out on Instagram. My handle's at rachelgregory.cns. You can send me a direct message or you can email me at rachel@metflexlife.com if you have any questions. And head over to my website if you're interested in any other information, previous podcasts, recipes, programs, tons of blog posts, tons of free information. And yeah, I'll chat with you next time.